floods of Baton Rouge last year. Before the awful traumatic shooting this summer, I asked Congressman Steve Scalise, who should I talk to when I want to talk to somebody about the flood recovery? And he said, Garrett Graves is your guy. So it's a good time to have him here, reflecting back on the 1-year anniversary of that. We just saw New Orleans flooding over the weekend. One of the things that we asked is that you keep questions limited to members of press club or the working press, and also try to just keep them brief. And Congressman Graves, we ask that you try to repeat the question if you can, since we're not all on microphone, obviously. But yeah, join me in welcoming Congressman Garrett Graves.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and I want to thank you all for being here today. In anticipation of some protests, we stacked the room with some members of our staff and half my family. So thank you all for being here. A couple of things starting out. Number one, I think that we're probably in one of the safest times in our state's history right now, primarily because both the Louisiana legislature and the U.S. Congress are out of session. Number two, I also want to thank the governor and the legislature for their performance this year, because I think for the first time in a long time they actually make Congress appear functional. But I want to talk about a few things seriously. Number one, you look at the tone of politics today, and I want to be clear in that I'm implicating myself as well. I'm extremely concerned about the trajectory that we're on right now, where folks label themselves and are incredibly prejudiced, based solely upon political party or ideology. I think the thing that's really important for us all to remember first is that we're Americans. And that whether we look very locally here or we look nationally, when you start talking about some of the priorities of individuals, I think that you're going to see an extraordinary set of similarities. Whether you talk at the national level, ensuring that we have a secure country, that our homeland is secure, ensuring that we're not mortgaging our kids' future by taking this trajectory of our national debt far in excess of $20 trillion as it is today. And locally, embracing things like traffic solutions, crime solutions, improving education, and many, many things that we share. And so again, I think moving forward, we all, regardless of ideology or political party, need to recognize that there are countless things that we can't all agree upon, and that we can work together to accomplish. And I think some of the tone that we've seen in politics over the past several months are putting us on a trajectory that's very dangerous for our country. And I'm hopeful that we see a sharp turn. I certainly believe that what we saw happen with Steve Scalise, who was briefly mentioned a few minutes ago, was largely motivated by some of the rhetoric and polarization that you're seeing right now in politics. And I'll say it again, I think it's a dangerous trajectory. So I want to talk about a few things today. Starting out about flood. As was mentioned, we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of what was, as we all know, a catastrophic flood for our region. A lot of progress has been made over the last 1 year in that nearly $5 billion in federal funds have been provided through various programs, primarily direct financial assistance to individuals, through the National Flood Insurance Program, through some of the claims that are out there for those, which encompasses nearly $2.4 trillion of that $5 billion. Additional assistance through the Department of Agriculture, through Small Business Administration, and many, many other programs assisting people trying to get back on their feet and recovering from the catastrophic flood that we had in August. In addition to that $5 billion, as many of you know, the congressional delegation has been working very closely with the state, and we to date have been able to secure approximately $2 trillion in additional assistance. We recognize that there were unmet needs out there. We worked together on a bipartisan basis to ensure that we could get additional resources. And as far as I'm concerned, that work has not stopped. I do have concerns based on anecdotal information just from traveling South Louisiana, the impacted areas, particularly areas of Livingston Parish, East Baton Rouge, and Ascension Parish are some of the worst hit in the state. I have strong concerns about the rate of recovery in some areas. As you all know, we still have people that are living in gutted homes, that are living in tents, that are living in trailers, and other conditions that are less than satisfactory, and certainly not anything that's comparable to pre-flood conditions. And so we still have a long way to go. And I will tell you, I am concerned about the rate of funds going out the door. And so we need to certainly make sure that we redouble efforts to get the funds out the door, to connect with those who have unmet needs. It's very difficult to go out there and talk to someone living in a moldy gutted home who is saying that they need, pick a number, $40,000 out of the $2 billion that's available, and tell them that simply bureaucracy is the obstacle or impediment to connecting the dots. That's one of the reasons why I think so many people are frustrated with government. An example of why so many people are frustrated with government. I think it's well earned frustration and dissatisfaction with government. We're continuing to work with the state and with federal agencies. I've had the opportunity to meet with Secretary Carson, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, talk to them about some of our ideas on ways to expedite, ways to cut bureaucracy, ways of lowering compliance and administrative costs while still respecting the environment, having ample public input, safety, and health considerations addressed as well. So again, I had the opportunity to meet with them twice in the past few weeks, and as a matter of fact, we have a call with HUD officials this afternoon to continue those discussions. So we're going to be moving forward on that. I think a really important conversation that we need to continue having in regard to flood recovery is about prevention. We just saw over the weekend in New Orleans what happens when you have floodwaters coming in and the impacts they can have in a very short period of time. You think for just a minute, if you're one of those flood victims, standing there holding your flood insurance check, standing there holding a flood recovery check from FEMA, having access to the loan from the SBA or some other type of resources. And thinking about the fact that your home didn't just flood in August, but maybe flooded again in one of those smaller storms that we had subsequent to the August flood. And you're sitting there trying to decide, am I going to reinvest these dollars back in that home, back in that business? Or am I going to take these resources and move elsewhere? And elsewhere doesn't necessarily mean to Alexandria, Louisiana, Shreveport, or Monroe. That could mean out of state, further complicating the state's economic and budget problems. So one of the things that we've got to do, taking this $2 billion in funds that are available through the and I need to clarify, $1.7 billion through the Community Development Block Grant Funds and approximately $300 million through Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. We need to take these resources, and one of the things that we can do that provides one of the best recovery investments for these victims, for these flood victims, is investing into projects like the COMEAT project to help prevent repetitive floods, to help improve the resiliency of these communities. Much money is being spent right now elevating these individual homes and businesses, and certainly that's an important tool that's available to us in many cases. But keep in mind, if your home and business is elevated, and if it floods, you still can't go anywhere because everything in between you is flooded. It does paralyze our economy. It paralyzes our community. If we can take more watershed type approaches, like the COMEAT project, that has an awful history of being around for approximately 34 years, and unfortunately, largely status quo for the Corps of Engineers. In fact, at a Recovery Task Force meeting a few weeks ago, I asked them a simple question. Keep in mind, you have task force members from South Louisiana, Central Louisiana, and North Louisiana. I said, name a Corps of Engineers project that's been completed by the Corps of Engineers in the last 20 years. Of all of those members of the Recovery Task Force, including members of agencies in the state of Louisiana that work with the Corps of Engineers and carry out these projects, not a single project could they identify. And you know what? They're pretty much right. With the exception of rare exception about what happened after Hurricane Katrina with some of those projects that have been around since the 1960s and 70s. And the only project I could think of was the Davis Pond Freshwater Diversion Project in St. Charles Parish. Relying upon the Corps of Engineers to complete these projects by themselves is largely a process that's never going to be completed. Now, I'm working on that, but in the meantime, we've got to be more aggressive. Let's keep in mind the West Shore project in St. John Parish took the Corps 42 years just to finish studying the project. When I was working for the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority for the state of Louisiana, we didn't wait for the Corps. We stepped in, we took the reins, we moved forward, and we finished those projects, and in many cases, for a fraction of the cost, in fact, in virtually all cases, a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the time. Now, we've been able, just in the last 2.5 years that I've been in Congress, we've been able to increase the historic appropriation for the Comey project tenfold compared to the previous 4 years I was in Congress. So I'll say that again. If you take the 4 years before I began representing this area in Congress, you add up those dollars and you multiply it times 10, that's how much we've been able to secure through the Corps of Engineers in the 2.5 years I've been in Congress. While we're on the right trajectory, we certainly need much more. The $300 million in hazard mitigation funds are federal funds. The $1.7 billion in community development block grant are federal funds. If there's a will, we can work forward with these funds to achieve the objectives of the Comey program, Comey project benefiting East Baton Rouge, Ascension, and Livingston Parish, making these areas more resilient, and we can complement that with other investments that are needed to ensure that we address particularly some of the lower basin areas in the vicinity of the Amite River. Number two, one of the other challenges we have in this area is related to crime. And unfortunately, once again, we're seeing statistics going in the wrong direction. We're seeing violent crime increasing in this community, increasing, not going down. And this affects every single one of us, not just the victims of crime, because we're all victims. Because when you have an uptick in crime, that uptick in crime, that threat of violence reverberates throughout our community. It threatens everyone, it scares everyone. And to watch as precious resources, precious federal resources, are being potentially lost or wasted through the BRAVE program raises strong concern. We've got to make sure two things. And I really want to highlight this, because right now, folks are paying attention to the contracts that are issued. And certainly we need to look into that. But most importantly right now, we have precious federal resources that are going to expire. We are going to miss the opportunity to spend these dollars. So while we need to look into contracts and any potential improprieties and things like that, yes we do. We cannot lose sight of two things. One, we have resources that are available until September 30th of this year. We need to find the best investments that those dollars can be invested in. And we need to get those contracts in place and make sure we don't lose those dollars. So two things there. One, we need to make sure we don't lose the dollars. We've got to invest them. Two, we need to make sure they're being invested in areas that are truly going to bring us returns back. And I think that what that means is it means that we need to be working very closely with our DA, with our Chief of Police, and with Sheriff Gautreaux of the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Department. The folks that are on a day-to-day basis intimately involved in crime. I shouldn't be making that decision. It's not my job on a daily basis to be working intimately with the law enforcement community out there on the street seeing what's going on. The law enforcement professionals, they're the ones who need to be involved in this decision. And I think going forward, we cannot lose sight of those two things. Best investment, don't lose the dollars. Because I'll tell you, if we don't spend the dollars wisely, our chances of getting dollars in the future are certainly going to be threatened. And if we return those dollars, if we lose them, then certainly turning that trend of increasing violent crime in our community is going to be very difficult to do. Number three is traffic. We're coming off a legislative session where we saw an effort to try to bring additional resources into the transportation area fair. Now, when we announced for Congress in 2014, this is one of the big topics that we discussed during our announcement, was talked about the need for traffic solutions. I've stood here at this podium before and talked about how we've watched for decades, and I want to be clear, I'm not pointing fingers at this governor, the previous governor, or even the three prior governors before that. This is something, the problem we're facing today is a result of decades and decades of mismanagement, lack of attention, and politicizing transportation investments. These aren't political gifts to be given away. Our transportation resources, once again, are precious resources that need to be wisely invested. Yes, it's correct that the state transportation revenue stream has not gone up for decades in the state of Louisiana. the dollars have not kept up with inflation in any way. Yes, it's correct that this region has some of the worst traffic in the nation, as has been identified in multiple studies. It's correct that we spend an average of 47 hours a year in traffic. It's correct that we spend nearly $1,000 in wasteful gasoline payments. It's correct that we send off countless emissions into the environment needlessly because of our inefficient traffic solutions. Our interstate system has become our main street through the capital region. And lack of transportation investment and planning in this area, a flawed prioritization system used by the state for decades, has resulted in this region having the worst traffic in the state and some of the worst in the United States. I want to commend Representative Steve Cotter for boldly stepping out into this and trying to identify solutions. But I think it's really important to recognize the environment that we're in. We're in an environment where last year, the state of Louisiana's tax increases comprised approximately 65% of all the tax increases that occurred nationwide. Folks are feeling the impacts on their pocketbooks. The polls that I saw statewide indicated 20 to 30% of Louisiana citizens were interested, I believe on the high end, if I recall. I saw one that topped out at about 37% of the citizens of Louisiana were willing to support a higher gas tax. And personally, I think that goes back to a few underlying issues. Number one, as data prepared by contractors indicated and was talked about extensively during the last governor's race, an estimated 89% of the funds that are derived from state gas taxes go to expenses inside the building at the Department of Transportation, not outside on turning dirt. I've heard folks refute those estimates, and I'll say again, those estimates were put together by contractors. I've seen some of the backup data, and I think that information is sound. So to come in and add millions and millions of dollars on top of that inefficient system raises strong concerns. Number two, without fundamentally changing this prioritization system that has built beautiful roads in places where no one drives or lives, causes strong concern. We didn't get the worst traffic in the nation here by having an appropriate prioritization system. This shouldn't be a political game. This is something where you can use metrics, you can use data, and in fact, the crisis group that was put together here, and how awful is it that a not-for-profit had to be formed to step in and do the job of government because government wasn't and couldn't do it. They were able to develop a prioritization system, yielding appropriate metrics to help identify the best bang for the buck for transportation projects. And we've got to do that as a state. Now, third, and importantly, if you look at this region, 1989, there was a program called the Times Program. In 1989, there was an additional 4 cents that was added per gallon to all of our gasoline taxes. And they identified projects all over the state of Louisiana to fund through that Times Program. And as I understand, there was lots of political wrangling going on to try and get the votes to make it pass. It ultimately did pass. And as a result, the capital region doesn't have a single project in there. Not in East or West Baton Rouge, not in Ascension or Livingston, not in Iberville, not one project. Yet, that 1989 4-cent gas tax, which was projected to last for approximately 25 years, is projected to extend now. I think the latest I saw was until 2049. Not the 25 years it was initially projected. So adding insult to injury, I'll say it again, some of the worst traffic in the nation here in the capital region. We've been paying 4 cents a gallon. That's been going out to other projects in other areas of the state. As our traffic gets worse, not better, now they're asking us to continue paying that tax at the time for an additional, I think, 35 years. That's outrageous. And to add even a little tidbit that makes it worse, that 4 cents isn't even sufficient to cover the debt service. So they're taking actually between 5 and 6 cents further eating into the availability of tax dollars to address our traffic solutions here in this region. I know that the mayor's put a proposal forth, and I want to commend her for doing that, for stepping in to this and recognizing that it's a priority. I also want to urge that I think there are 2 things that need to be kept in mind. Number one, transportation program has been funded historically by a user fee, by a gas tax. I think sticking to that is critical, and that's something we've been advocating for at the federal level. When you start stepping outside of user fees, I think it becomes incredibly dangerous. And as many of you know, the proposal as it is now, I think, is based largely on a property tax. And I think we need to look carefully at the appropriate financial structure to make sure that we can move forward. Number two is that East Baton Rouge Parish, being the largest parish in this region, certainly can step out and take a leadership role. But we can't solve our regional traffic solutions alone. I think working together with Livingston, Ascension, West Baton Rouge, and Iberville is critical to our ability to truly solve the traffic problems that we have today. As we know, the congestion and traffic jams don't stop in our parish borders. And just to circle back, well, a third point, just to circle back, data and prioritization metrics, best bang for the buck, need to identify the project investments. Nothing else, not politics, nothing else should identify the projects. We've got to give taxpayers confidence that these dollars are being invested in the projects that are going to deliver the best results for our community. Now, I want to hit two other things before turning to questions. Number one, I've been in Congress now for 2.5 years, and a lot of people ask, how's it been and what are you getting done? I can candidly say that looking back, we haven't delivered every single thing that we had identified as priorities for working with people in South Louisiana. But I'll also tell you that I am proud of the accomplishments that we've been able to achieve. We've been able to accomplish many of the things that were on our list. We very quickly picked up other things and added them to the list as conditions arose. And I want to run through a handful of those very quickly. Number one, and I mentioned this, $2 billion in additional flood recovery funds. And I'll say it again, we're not stopping. Number two, a recurring revenue stream of approximately $100 million for coastal restoration. It was a bill that we introduced in 2015. We ultimately attached to the transportation bill signed into law. Number three, FEMA legislation. It wasn't on our initial list. It came up as a result of the August flood from talking to flood victims. People calling FEMA and trying to understand what their status is in regard to their claims to FEMA. And the FEMA representative, first of all, if they could get them on the phone, was simply logging into a database, looking up the person, and then reciting the information. Our office would occasionally call just to see how long it took us to get through. It was outrageous. If that person's simply logging onto a database, why can't flood victims do it from home? So we introduced legislation that has passed the House of Representatives and in consideration in the Senate right now that would require FEMA to establish a database. Many of you heard people talking about the efforts by both the Obama administration and more recently the Trump administration to rescind our offshore energy revenue sharing dollars through GOMESA, Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act. I will tell you that I spent about 10 years of my life, blood, sweat, and tears, lots of getting very close, and finally in December of 2006, getting that bill signed into law by President Bush. And as many of you may know, the real revenue stream starts this year. We're talking anywhere from $120 to $150 billion a year and more, and because of the great decision of the citizens of Louisiana under a constitutional amendment vote, those funds are committed to coastal restoration and hurricane protection in the state of Louisiana. One of the greatest threats facing our state. And so I did meet with Secretary Zinke. I talked to the Vice President about it. I know Steve Scalise talked to the White House Budget Director. And ultimately, we were able to convince the Appropriations Committee to protect those dollars, and they did. And so we're going to keep working through the House and Senate to make sure that those dollars are protected moving forward, and we can continue to make progress on the restoration of our coast and the protection of our communities. Other legislation is helping to improve competitiveness of offshore energy revenue sharing, of offshore energy leases. And we were able to pass legislation through the House that puts those online to auction, those leases through an online auction, bringing additional competition to the fray, which also, additional competition means additional dollars, which means additional revenue sharing for our coast. And we passed that. Many, many other things, and I could go on for long, but I'll hit one of them. In December of 2015, we negotiated approximately a $500 million increase in transportation funds for the state of Louisiana through the highway bill. And that $500 million has resulted in things being done, for example, helping to address the bottleneck in the vicinity of the Washington Street exit, the only place in the nation where the traffic funnels to one lane. The project to add an additional lane between Highland Road and Highway 73 on I-10, adding 3 lanes in each direction. The PQ exit, I'm confident or optimistic that we'll be able to get that one fully constructed, which is going to relieve congestion off that Highland exit, which backs up traffic. And many other transportation solutions, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention red snapper. Red snapper is a fishery in the Gulf of Mexico and one of the prize Gulf game fish that regular citizens go fishing every weekend on. In fact, I went with 2 of our kids this weekend. And to block off our access to the Gulf of Mexico in a state that's known as the sportsman's paradise, I think is ridiculous. And anyone who takes 5 minutes to look into this, and I know many people say, why are you focusing on this? It comes up every town hall meeting, every Facebook Live, everything we do, anytime we're out in the public. And it's an incredibly pervasive issue, but the trend or the precedent that this sets to give away this resource for free, I think is just ridiculous. So many other things, and I'm happy to answer those through Q&A, but let me just quickly note, moving forward, some of the things we're working on, moving forward. We're going to be reauthorizing the flood insurance program. And I'll tell you, one of the things that drives me crazy, I think that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the federal government, is the largest cause of land loss in South Louisiana. And to see the federal government, which, to be clear, we lose 1,900 square miles of our coast, it makes our communities more vulnerable to flooding and to hurricanes. And to see the federal government take that increased vulnerability and charge us for it, when they caused the increase in vulnerability, I think is preposterous. And so we are working on reauthorizing the flood insurance program, which expires on September 30th of this year, to ensure that we have a fair flood insurance program, that to the extent it's further opened up to the private sector, that they have appropriate competition and appropriate, I guess, level of competition for them to ensure that they don't come in and cherry pick policies across the nation for low and moderate risk, leaving high risk areas like Louisiana on our own with no diversity in the portfolio, therefore charging us outrageous rates, decreasing our property values, and in many cases causing some areas of South Louisiana to be depopulated. Moving forward, we're continuing to work on our effort to bring down the budget deficit and trying to turn that around, ensuring that taxpayer funds are invested in a way that's transparent and truly returns dollars on investment, working with organizations like OpenGov. Moving forward, we're continuing to work on flood recovery, and one of the major topics of our major use of our time over the last several months and next several months is going to be on infrastructure specifically, fundamentally reforming the Corps of Engineers. We're the 42-year study for West Shore Project in St. John, St. Charles area. We're the 34-year situation with the Comey Project. Simply do not happen again. Making sure that the regulatory process, the permitting process is efficient, that we can spend dollars turning dirt, not turning pages through thousands of pages of reports and studies that don't bring value to the process. So we certainly have an awful lot of work to do moving forward. I'm looking forward to continuing to work on a bipartisan basis with members of Congress from our delegation and across the nation to ensure that we can make government more efficient, more transparent, and more innovative. With that, happy to take any questions that you all have.
Jared, have you sat down and talked with or seen Steve Scalise? Can you give us your view of how he's actually doing right now?
Yeah. Sue is asking about Steve Scalise, and I first want to say I think it's really important that the updates come from the hospital and from the doctors. I will say a few things at a high level. One, it is truly a miracle and I've had the opportunity to talk to David Bailey, the special agent who took out the shooter. I had the chance to talk to Trent Kelly, the congressman of Mississippi, who was closest to the shooter at third base when the rounds began going off, and Jeff Duncan and many other members of Congress that were in close proximity, including Jeff Duncan, talking to the guy within 3 feet. It is a miracle that he sent off, according to Trent Kelly, perhaps 80 rounds, the gunman, 80 rounds from a high caliber rifle, and the only person that died was him. That is amazing. That is absolutely amazing. The folks that that were hit, all of them are certainly doing much better. Steve has a challenge in that he has both skeletal injuries in the hip and leg, as well as soft tissue and organ damage in the abdomen area. And in some cases, the recovery for those things conflict with one another, movement versus not movement, and of course the risk of infection. But I want to say it again, I think best to rely upon the doctors for updates there. I think what's most important is that Steve said that he's coming back next month. So we'll see how that goes. He may be fighting off doctors on the way out of the hospital to come. Steve is a fighter. His attitude and spirits have remained very high. His wife and kids have been at his side through much of this, and indicating his progress. He's moved to the recovery hospital in Washington, which is certainly good news, indicating that upward trajectory of recovery.
I was just trying to get your sense of it and how you feel he's doing at this point.
Yeah, look, certainly there are ups and downs. I don't think that he's out of all the potential pitfalls or potential regressive times necessarily, meaning that you could have additional infection or other things moving forward. But look, he got hit with a high caliber rifle. He lost a tremendous amount of blood. You saw the reports from the doctor at MedStar Trauma that indicated that he was at risk of death when he came in the hospital. Was in shock, and certainly where he is now is just extraordinary. And so I think his spirits have been very high and have been boosted by family and friends being around a good bit, and I'm optimistic of his recovery. Sure. Yeah.
I'm curious about you've mentioned multiple times that you're continuing to try to get more federal aid for the flood recovery. I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about your experience with the Trump administration.
Sure.
And how, I guess, receptive to the flood goal of
Number one, when the Vice President came down, I had the opportunity to fly both up and down with him on Air Force Two. We did talk about flood recovery. Obviously, that was a part of his trip when we went to Denham and visited one of the flood victim families there. They continue to monitor the unmet needs. Elizabeth, to be honest with you, and I'm not sure if I repeated the question. I'll start over. So she's asking about the Trump administration, work with the Trump administration on flood recovery if they're receptive to additional dollars. So again, I discussed it with the Vice President. I've had numerous meetings with Ben Carson. We're having, and with his staff. We're having additional meetings with them today. Here's where the challenge is. We were able to appropriate approximately $2 billion in additional funds. To date, according to local newspaper, a little over 1% of those funds have been allocated to flood victims. It's very difficult to quantify the remaining unmet needs when so much money is in the bank, which goes back to some of the concerns that I've had for several months now that this was going to happen. I think that it's fair to say that the administration is receptive to additional dollars, provided that the data shows it. Number two, they have been working with us, although I'll say not at the speed that I had hoped, on some of the waivers and cutting of red tape to help both speed up and, more importantly, make the recovery more efficient by not requiring in some cases, I think, overblown expenses on things like environmental reviews. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying environmental reviews aren't needed. What I am saying is that you don't need to come in and do the same exact environmental review on every home that is a cookie cutter home in a neighborhood that were all built within a year's time, meaning you're going to have the same construction materials, the same type of paint, things like that. You certainly have more risk for lead, asbestos, and others in older homes than you do in newer homes. And I think there's a way to tier some of the environmental assessments in a way more so, they're doing it some now, but more so than they're doing it where you can do programmatic assessments for certain neighborhoods, significantly saving time and saving money and getting more money in the hands of flood victims where it belongs. Yes, sir.
Attorney General Jeff Landry has gone on record as saying that Governor Edwards has made a mistake in appointing a convicted felon in the name of Larry Bankston to serve in such a critical role for several of the boards and commissions, namely the Comey Diversion Canal and the Contractors Board. Your colleague, Mark Meadows, grilled Governor Edwards about what may have been some inappropriate intervention by Mr. Bankston involving the IEM contract. And Senator Kennedy has described the entire IEM situation that evolved there as a, quote, Three Stooges-like performance, unquote. Do you concur with those sentiments, and do you think that Louisiana may have a perception problem as a result of Mr. Bankston's appointment to some of these boards?
So you're asking about appointments by the governor of convicted felons, some of the comments expressed by both AG Jeff Landry and Senator John Kennedy about the concerns of how that impacts the perception of Louisiana. Perhaps I'll take it a step further and say, does that affect our ability to get additional recovery dollars and things like that? Number one, Robert, I want to go back and restate what I mentioned earlier. I have had strong concerns about how this disaster has been managed. And I think that there have been some decisions that were made and not made that have contributed to the inefficiency, that have contributed to the money not getting out the door as quickly as it could have. For example, if the contracting process had been started earlier, then some of the hiccups and fundamental problems that occurred in the first effort, perhaps you would have had time to recover from those versus further victimizing the flood victims by making them delay, by not getting money out the door. I'll say it again, here we are approaching 1 year anniversary of the flood, and you have just over 1% of the money out to flood victims. And look, I'm not trying to start a political fight with anybody. I'll just say that data doesn't lie, and it's difficult to justify or to substantiate those types of timelines. I think that some bad decisions were made. In regard to specific actions, the only, there were some apparent conflicts of interest that were out there. I think it's important to carefully look through those to make sure that we don't have some egg on our face down the road because after an Inspector General investigation by the federal government or FBI or others, they find some improprieties in the contracting. I will say that the only real personal experience I had is back when I was working for the CPRA and we were sued by one of the levee districts, represented by the attorney, and I thought that it was awful advice that levee district sued the state, and Judge Fields agreed with the CPRA that the lawsuit was not appropriate. I think it was a waste of time, money, and relationship, worked, again, to the detriment of time, money, and the relationship, and ultimately progress on what is now the Comey project. So, certainly we need to all be working together much better. Things need to stay above board. The federal government doesn't play around when it comes to spending federal dollars in ways that helps out a brother-in-law or whatever else. And there's no doubt, as you somewhat inferred, Louisiana does have a reputation. We have a reputation for a lot of good things, but there's some bad things that go along with it, and we need to, unfortunately, kind of over-sanitize our efforts in some cases to address that perception problem.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think a week or two ago, one of our speakers was asked the direct question. They heard testimony or speakers say regarding the Highway Trust Fund that it was only 11 cents of every dollar that actually went into the blacktop and the concrete on the roads.
Yes, sir.
What is the number? I'm an old engineer from Georgia Tech. What's the number?
Mr. Panessa, you're asking about, you're saying the previous speaker indicated that approximately 11% of every, or 11 cents of every dollar was spent on actually blacktopping and...
Actually, the question was asked by someone here in the room. Is it? I heard that it was only 11 cents of every dollar. Is that correct or not? And the speaker said, I'm not sure, but I'll check. So what is the real number?
So this was an issue that came up extensively during the last governor's campaign. And that covers, the 11 cents is in reference to the state trust fund. So of the state trust fund that's derived from gas taxes at the pump, the 17-cent gas tax at the pump, I think it's 17 cents a gallon if I remember correctly, that 11 cents of every dollar of that state revenue is spent on turning dirt, on construction, asphalt, concrete, and other things along those lines. Now, is there a significant contribution of the federal government? Yes, and as a matter of fact, most projects like interstates and U.S. highways and others are funded 80 to 90% by federal funds. And so the state both matches those dollars and spends funds on other state roads and local projects, parish projects, and things along those lines.
Garrett, let me ask the question another way. If the state spends $1 billion on highways out of the trust fund, the trust fund dollars, is it correct to say that only 110 million of that goes to the concrete and the asphalt that your tires ride on the road on?
Of the state-derived fund, which I believe it was either 16 or 17 cents a gallon plus the 4 cents for the time program, of the state-derived dollars, it's my understanding that that 11 cents is correct, yes.
Where does the other 89 cents go?
Well, I've seen in the past discussion in the newspaper and others that some of the funds have gone to state police, some of the funds have gone, I think the majority of the funds are going to fund retirement of transportation employees, going to fund staff salaries and expenses inside the building, and other things. You know, look, I have a lot of respect for Department of Transportation Development Secretary Sean Wilson. I think he's a very bright guy. I've had very good interaction with him working together on projects. We differ on perhaps some of the things that need to be done before anyone asks for a penny more of transportation dollars from the citizens of Louisiana, meaning let's revamp the department, let's improve the efficiency of the dollars being spent, let's improve our prioritization program, let's make other areas pay for their time projects that went over budget and over time. And not heap those responsibilities or liabilities on the capital region that doesn't have any projects in there. I think there are better ways of doing this, and again, better prioritization and others, bringing trust to the taxpayers before you cut. And also, I think one of the major flaws in the last effort, you've got to put your projects up front, which at least Mayor Brim did. She put her projects up front, said, this is what you're going to buy with these funds, and that largely wasn't done in this last effort, and I think that's a flawed approach. I think you have to give taxpayers the opportunity to view what it is that's being proposed. If you're asking them for additional money, you don't go into the grocery store and give them money first, and then they give you a cart of groceries later. And I think that lesson applies here. Let people make informed decisions.
On the House health care bill, which you voted yes on, do you know or have a sense for whether the majority of your constituents wanted you to vote yes on that bill given this negative polling? Secondly, could you address what the Senate is doing on health care and your position on
Yeah, sure. So let's go there. So you're asking about healthcare, the healthcare vote. Let's go through some of the things. Number one, when I ran in both 2014 and 2016, this is one of the leading platforms, leading issues on our platform that we were focused on repealing Obamacare and improving healthcare in the state and in the United States. And just looking at a few of the statistics, 123% increase in premiums in the state of Louisiana, up to 140% in some cases. You have 1/3 of the counties, parishes, and states in the United States that are down to one insurer. If I remember right, in the state of Louisiana, I think it's 21 parishes have 1 or 2 insurers left. And I can go back and double check that statistic. At the same time that people are paying more in insurance premiums, the deductibles are increasing. I think that there is a major flaw in how healthcare is being addressed, and I want to be clear, including at the federal level by some of the proposals that have been out there. Healthcare inflation is increasing at a rate much higher than other sectors of the economy. And when you dive into that specifically, drug costs are the largest increase within the healthcare sector. We are making a major flaw by approaching healthcare by trying to figure out how do we tax or address increased premiums and other things, trying to hit these excessive costs, as opposed to doing a better job trying to bring down costs, improving transparency, incentivizing the right type of behavior, not letting these crazy companies come in, buy drugs, and increase costs 100-fold, as we've seen in some cases. And so in our district, in the polling that we've done and the polling that I've seen from others, 75 to 80% of the people in this congressional district think they're paying too much, want healthcare fundamentally reformed. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I don't think that the House passed bill was perfect. But you know what? It was the one vehicle to get us the first step through the 5-step process to fundamentally change healthcare. I wasn't under the expectation that that was going to be signed into law as it was written, just like the Senate in the last vote they did was clear that that wasn't going to be signed into law either. The Senate is getting back together on a bipartisan basis. I wish that had happened in the House. It's my understanding that in the House, the Democrat leadership told the Democrats not to work with Republicans on it. I don't think that's the way we should legislate. And you can look at the bills we've introduced. Virtually all the bills we've introduced have bipartisan co-sponsors on them. I try to work together with other people, but I'll also say that that vote in progressing health insurance reform, I think, was consistent with the wishes of people in South Louisiana and discussions that we've had with them. While you're right that many people didn't want to see that bill enacted, it did protect pre-existing conditions. It did protect those that were covered under Medicaid expansion. It did allow folks to keep their kids on insurance until they're 26 years old, and a lot of other things that people have identified in the Affordable Care Act that they think were good. So I think I'm getting ready to get the hook.
I know you have another.
I'm happy to stay back.
Yeah, I know you have another engagement, so I just wanted to thank you for joining us today.